Right now is Missouri Senator and Senate Armed Services Committee member Eric Schmitt. Senator, good to see you this morning. How will this urgent need for aid play out in the Senate in your view?
Well, there's just no way this package, as it's been presented, or we know about right now that we'll receive probably today, should move forward in its current form. These bills and these particular issues, they're disparate issues. They have different considerations. They have different realities on the ground. They have different levels of support. They have different likelihoods of success. We need to stand with Israel, but we also need to make sure that these bills are considered separately. So if you're asking for money for Ukraine, that should be its own bill. If you're asking for money for Israel, that should be its own bill. Whatever this humanitarian aid is, and by the way, if history is any guide, these dollars typically end up in the hands of terrorists who, essentially do what we saw a couple of Saturdays ago and continue these atrocities in Israel. So what we're seeing is failed foreign policy from the Biden administration, which is, by the way, a carryover of the strategy that Obama had when he was president of essentially giving cash to the Iranians, which have funded a lot of this stuff. But also now a really cynical political play here, Maria. This is all about politics. It's meant to bootstrap other initiatives, let's say like Ukraine, that are less popular, that we've already spent $112 billion on, with something right now that has a lot of support with Israel. It's really cynical. It's what's wrong with Washington. But the main point here is, just like with our appropriations process, which, by the way, Chuck Schumer has spent 0.0 minutes this whole year debating any funding bill, any appropriations bill. We need to make sure we have those debates on those individual bills by themselves, too. But the same is true with this foreign aid package. Separate it out. Let's have real debate. Let's consider this like we're supposed to be. The Senate is supposed to be a thoughtful place where you have real debate and you make important decisions. We're not doing any of that, and it looks like more of the same.
The Democrats are controlling the Senate. It could pass, though, right?
Well, I don't know. It'll depend on how, I think as Republicans, for us to stick together here. They need 60 votes to move forward. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as Republicans to be the adults in the room here, to be sober-eyed, or to be sober and clear-eyed about this and say, look, what is the request for Israel? Let's consider that. What is it? What is the objective in Ukraine? What is this going to get us? We can't have an open-ended blank check. Our European allies simply have not stepped up. There's been no real accountability. They're worried that if they show corruption, they'll lose even more support. Those ought to be separate debates. Maria, this is really kind of insulting to the American taxpayer. I think of it like this. The people that I represent all across, they work hard every day. This money gets taken out of their paycheck, and then we're responsible for making decisions, right? And we should be accountable for those. But we should be accountable in a way that they know exactly what we support, as opposed to rolling all this stuff in. This is essentially an omnibus bill, and there's not going to be much debate. Chuck Schumer's not interested in that. And we got to get away from this. We can't have these deals at the end where, all this stuff's lumped together. And quite frankly, it's not the best way to run a railroad, and certainly not a country.
Yeah, and, he's using every crisis to just spend more money. He wants more money to spend. I'm very concerned about what's happening to our U.S. troops, Senator. U.S. troops near Baghdad were targeted in another drone and rocket attack just minutes before the president delivered his address last night. U.S. troops have been repeatedly attacked in the region in recent days. Here's what the Pentagon had to say about this yesterday. Watch.
These small-scale attacks are clearly concerning and dangerous, right? And we're going to, as I mentioned, we're going to do everything necessary to ensure that we're protecting our forces. And if and when we choose to respond, we'll do so at a time of our choosing. But if you step back and look again at what our broader strategic aim here, which is to deter a broader regional conflict, which is why you see us putting additional forces into the theater.
So we know now that, Iran has already killed Americans in Syria, in Iraq, on Joe Biden's watch. What are the ramifications of that? A U.S. Navy destroyer also, by the way, intercepted several missiles fired by Houthi militants near the coast of Yemen yesterday. More terrorism, Senator.
Yeah, we're at a very critical time here right now as it relates to U.S. troops and, American citizens in that region. And I think it's important to put it in broader context. Here's what hasn't worked. Trying to appease the Iranians by sending them, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of cash on the Iran nuclear deal. That has completely backfired. That was the Obama foreign policy legacy. Now, Joe Biden frees up $6 billion. He's also not, enforced sanctions on Iranian oil, which has enriched them. And essentially in 2019, Maria, Iran was stopping their funding of Hamas. Hamas was essentially broke. Now these folks are, their coffers are filled with cash. It's because of the terrible decisions decisions, the miscalculations here by the Biden administration. So one of the missed opportunities last night, I think, Maria, was Joe Biden should be very clear that if you in Iran can, there's a difference between Iran saying nothing and telling them don't do it. And we should be very clear. Iran should be telling these folks, their proxies, if you should not attack U.S. interests and troops. And the red line there is, if you do, we will respond with overwhelming force. That kind of clarity is just not what happened last night. Again, it's this cynical attempt to bootstrap Ukraine funding on the back of support for Israel. All of these things considered separately. Let's be clear with Iran about what the consequences are of their proxies moving forward and killing Americans. Again, it's projecting weakness from this president, and the region is, it's a disaster right now because, again, American foreign policy has been obsessed by the Democrats of appeasement and trying to, apologize for the previous administration, which, by the way, we had peace. You had the Abraham Accords. There were no wars. So, what that tells me and the American people is, let's be strong. Let's be deterrent here. We have a deterrent force that they respect. And right now, this president isn't respected, and we're seeing the deadly consequences play out on the world stage.
It's incredible that we were talking about peace in the Middle East under Secretary Pompeo and President Trump with those Abraham Accords. And then when Joe Biden walked into the White House, I was told that the rule was, don't even mention the Abraham Accords. Don't murmur the words.
Right.
Senator, we're going to be watching all of this. It could be a very important weekend as we are waiting for the Israelis to move into Gaza any moment. Senator Eric Schmitt, thank you for your insights this morning. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Maria.